As a general outline, we would want to address the following. Once the strategic plan is developed, the work is only half done. Without effective implementation, a strategic plan may be no more than a fancy bar on a shelf. Leaders face many challenges in getting organizational buy-in of the goals, the plan, and in setting up a system of accountability to ensure that the strategic plan is followed. This program will aim to address this idea, drawing on the experience of today's panelists. Again, time permitting, this program will offer a question-answered period at the end of the speaker's presentation. With that said, let me introduce the program's presenters. First, Tim Prince is a Senior Advisor for Strategic Alignment with TURIS in Findorf in Madison, Wisconsin. Tim has over 18 years of experience in strategic planning, hospital and health system operations, health systems marketing, and facility project management. His expertise lies in the intersection of strategic planning and operational reality and is grounded in successful operations and project leadership. Tim leads project assessments and alignment efforts that bring understanding to the value proposition of major initiatives, from new service line development to major campus and facility investments. Second, Heather Adkins is Vice President and Chief Strategy and Mission Officer for the Christ Hospital Health Network in Cincinnati, Ohio. Heather has more than 17 years of experience in marketing, advertising, and consumer retention. Beginning her career in the newspaper industry, Heather developed a passion for consumer marketing and research, resulting in numerous healthcare industry awards. She now serves a region system of healthcare that extends the Christ Hospital's nearly 125 years of superior care and leadership to more than 100 locations in the greater Cincinnati area. Lastly, Ken Bonner is the Senior Director of Strategic Planning and Business Development for General Dynamics Information Technology in Baltimore, Maryland. Ken manages a business development team and is responsible for developing and executing a 5-year strategic plan, as well as identifying new capability areas to ensure readiness and to support future needs in military health programs. This includes electronic health records, virtualization technologies, research in telehealth, and virtual reality simulation, and advanced battlefield healthcare solutions. During this presentation, we hope to answer the following questions. Who do you involve in the strategic planning process? How do you communicate your strategic plan? How do you address lack of internal support? How do you ensure accountability and implementation? What tools and metrics can you use? How does your organizational mission affect the implementation? How often do you completely revise the strategic plan? How does the external environment affect the plan? And lastly, what roadblocks have you encountered? With that, I'll turn the presentation over to Tim Prince.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some thoughts and perspectives on what I've experienced, and hopefully we'll have some resonance with the audience. To get started, I've always viewed planning as navigation, and the simple tenets of figuring out where you want to go, figuring out where you are starting from, and identifying the key resources, enablers, and elements that are going to help you get there, as well as figuring out what in your environment might present obstacles, barriers, limitations, and competitive fronts against which you'll need to move. And then you have to set your course of action, and that's where you get into your tactics and your specifics. But as you're doing that, you really want to take your regular bings. And right here at the beginning, some of these elements of figuring out where you want to go is where you start answering some of the questions that are prompted at the beginning of this presentation. Who are you going to involve? When you first decide where you want to go, if you ask only your board of directors, you will likely find a strategic level, broad thinking, trajectory, concept approach. And if you don't involve staff, or at least frontline managers in that, you may not have the beginning question of where you want to go based in practical reality. So as far as who you involve in the process, you don't wait until you're into the process, but in fact, as you're laying out your project plan for your strategic plan, you think about the realities of implementation and indeed the direction you want to go with that. Likewise, you think about communication and how you're going to build support as you go. And we'll touch on some of the other elements as we go forward here. The different pieces of strategic, financial, operating, and business planning are depicted here in this diagram, and there's lots of different ways to show these different elements and how they come together. I do want to just sort of mention my definition of some of these things, and that the mission is really your timeless foundation of who you are and why you exist. Your vision is a statement of what you want to achieve, kind of what you want to become, and it allows you to exemplify your mission, and the values are the basis on which you accomplish those things. Your 3-year strategic plan or your long-range plan will set the direction for your organization, and it defines the imperatives of where you want to go. And I will be disagreed with on this, but in my view, 3-year strategic imperatives do not need to be measurable. In my view, the annual operating plan needs to have specific objectives that are measurable with tactics that are measurable, and those link right into your specific business unit plans, whether they be service line plans or a campus expansion plan or a physician integration relationship plan. Those have to have tactical metrics and activities, but your strategic direction should be directional in nature and not necessarily specifically measurable. They are, however, guided by your 5-year capital plan, which obviously, when you get into numbers, those are specific and measurable, as is true also for your annual budget. So the strategic plan development itself, you need to start by figuring out whether you're continuing a trajectory. You know, it used to be that strategic plans were done for these 10-year horizons, and then it became 5-year horizons in 3 years, and I've even done 18-month strategic plans with 6 months implementation operating initiatives. And so is this a continuation of things you've been doing and therefore a tweaking of your direction, or is it something completely new? And or maybe is there a piece of your plan that is completely new? And this is where I think you'll focus in on your support, gaining your internal support and finding your detractors. There are plenty of people in the organization who might see strategic planning as a waste of time, in that let's just get out there and do the work. But I would contend that you need that directional intent within which you guide your action. But you want to find those detractors early on, and in fact, if you can get them involved before you start setting your plan, the better off you're going to be. So who will you involve? You certainly want your thought leaders within your organization. You want thought leaders from outside of your organization, especially in this day and age of collaborative activities and the advent of accountable care organizations. You know, we've been involving business leaders for a number of years as board members, but now as the consumer aspect of buying healthcare becomes more prominent and more specific, we want to get some business folks involved beyond just how well is the care provided to their employees as patients, but rather how is an entire system developed and what is a specific healthcare provider's role within that system. So get outside of your organization as you're getting people involved. And you can do that either by bringing them into focus groups and directly in the planning committees and so forth, or if you have a facilitator, that person can go out and gather information through interviews and discussions with folks. You want to balance your participants with pragmatists and adventurous. In other words, don't just get people who agree with you. In fact, find some people who are adamantly against some of your ideas, maybe the most vocal critics of where strategies have fallen poorly in the past, and bring them in and get them involved early on. Again, that's going to help you get to your later on support. You know, if you have a particular focused and intense, say, director of nursing in the surgical services in your organization, and they may be very specific about the realities of running a great surgical operation and think strategic planning simply distracts from that, you may want to get that person involved. And I'll talk a little bit later about some ways to do that and get multiple perspectives into the process. And again, insiders and outsiders from the organization itself, patients. More and more organizations are going to patient and family advisors. Some of them have these committees and processes that are ongoing all the time. Others only tap into that resource under specific initiatives. You're best off if you have an ongoing patient and family advisor process so that you have built the trust and kind of the reality perspective for those participants so that when they come to support your strategic planning effort, they understand the nuances of the healthcare industry business that goes into delivering success. You also really want to be careful about aligning your methods to the culture or the participants in the process. There are a lot of different ways to do strategic planning. There are a lot of different concepts that go into what's successful. You need to be realistic about who you are. For instance, your decision-making process. If you're in an organization where the CEO gets 10 votes and the other executives each get 1, you really want to make sure you're putting a plan in place that the CEO is going to lead and endorse. If you have an organization that has a lot of board member influence, you obviously want to consider that in your process. You need to think about what the real role of your physicians and physician leadership is and make sure that that is reflective. And then again, what is the opportunity for staff and management to have input? What's the culture of your organization? Do they have the opportunity to speak freely? And how do you make sure that you get input in a way that is meaningful and respected by those within the organization? Again, that's how you make sure that communication on the back end is successful because they knew what was going on the front end, and getting your internal support with what you're going to do builds heavily on who was involved and how well they were involved in the process. So conceptually, some steps to get to strategic implementation then, as you've laid out your plan. Obviously, your vision is where you want to go, and your evolutionary expectations for what's going on in your environment, your internal and external environment. Who are you? What are you good at? Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? What do you want to start doing, stop doing, do more of, do less of, and so forth. And then what's the definition of an outcome? What does success really look like? And this is where I really need to emphasize you have to be realistic. You're much better off to have a simple, specific, strategic initiative that has key objectives that you can accomplish. Even if you get there more quickly, you can then renew and update and add additional objectives. All too often, folks will put these lofty strategic objectives out there, things that would be very, very hard to accomplish. You get halfway through your effort and you demoralize the effort, or you're distracted by some unexpected reality that hits you and you get pulled off of your path. So I very much emphasize keep it specific, keep it focused, keep it realistic, and set up hypotheses of what is realistic and what you can really do within your preferred path, that your initiatives are guided by reality. You need to absolutely make sure you're thinking about the financial imperatives and realities of your process while you're doing your strategic plan. That's why the diagram back at the beginning that links your 5-year capital plan, maybe it's not 5, maybe it's 3 for you, maybe it's 10, but links your long-term capital plan with your strategic plan, tying into your annual operating objectives that must be linked to your annual budgeting process. Your documentation of the strategic plan itself, you really need to get the salient points down to a single page. I'll show you an example of one approach to that, and I've used things as simple as a trifold brochure that actually we had available all throughout our hospital, and then obviously there's a lot of detail behind it. But you want to be able to have your key talking points, your key strategies, and your primary objectives, things that can be easily understood and communicated throughout the organization and outside of the organization. And again, think about how you're going to talk about it while you're developing the strategic plan. If you can't speak about it clearly and simply, you probably don't understand it well enough yourself. And so again, that's what I'd ask you to simplify, cut down, and focus what you're trying to accomplish. And then your action planning and monitoring, again, how are you going to monitor and how are you going to communicate your monitoring of your success? And a simple example I like to give is I walked into a hospital where I was doing a major master facility plan based on strategic initiatives, and right in the front lobby was this big sign that said, "Our door-to-balloon times are the best in the nation." Wow, that's fantastic, and most people on the phone here today probably know what that means. But I walked around the lobby and I started asking people, do you know what that means? And I had 4 people tell me that they thought that the gift shop must be nearby. So, in the context of what we do and what we measure and what we're trying to accomplish, a door to balloon time means something clinically. But if we simply said, we're the fastest at helping you avoid significant negative outcomes, or we're the best at keeping you alive after a heart attack, that means a lot more to your audience. And so when you think about action planning and monitoring and communicating, what are those salient efforts that actually make a difference based on your strategic initiatives and your key operating objectives? And so again, going back to the basic 7 habits of highly effective people, beginning with the end in mind. What are you really going to accomplish with the strategic plan? How are you going to talk about it? And how are you going to make sure you are successful in your efforts? You need to make sure you have all those up front as you're developing your concepts. So here's just a Gantt chart graphical representation of the steps I just talked about. These don't have to be excruciatingly long processes. They used to be much longer in the way we develop them. Now I think you can be a lot more focused. The ability to have great demographic and volume and activity information and projections about your market is much better than it used to be, and so you can really get a lot of that done up front before you even start creating your vision. You need to know what environment you're talking about and what your trajectory audience of interest is. And then you lay out these steps of creating your vision, and a couple of different steps there is your leadership kickoff, your interviews and small group discussion, again aligning those to the culture of the organization. And then I think you have a very small group of people who actually say, this is the vision, this is the strategy, and here's where we think we're going, and you use a hypothesis-based approach. Getting some input up front is good, but I think a lot of group approach to vision and strategy development ends up being more cathartic than effective, and you can focus specific ideas and get responses and reactions to that. And then this diverse group scenario assessment sessions, if those vision, strategy, and possible outcome statements are real, what are the strategy or what are the trajectories of possibilities and how do those play out? And so you really do some real life scenario testing for how those things could develop in time. So then you agree on your outcome and the specific initiatives, again, that'll get you in to support your strategic initiatives. Again, my concept of strategic initiatives are directional in intent, not measurable necessarily, but then your specific initiatives and objectives that get you there will be measurable. And then you get to your plan on a page. So after you've come up with your first and your future year targets and the specific activities and how they tie to your financial plans, your needs, and your limits, what are you going to say? How are you going to communicate this clearly and effectively on a single page? That single page then allows you to also highlight the specific annual operating activities, which should in fact inform your budget. And if you look at the dates on this, obviously the months are just for exemplary purposes. But I developed this in such a way where for most budget processes that are on a calendar year, fiscal year, this would allow you to be completing your annual budget for the next year at about the same time that you're finalizing your strategic plan and aligning your annual operating plan with those. And it is pretty important to have those steps in alignment. So your keys to success, focus on your strategic implementation, not on just a plan. In other words, what are you actually going to do differently or more of or less of in the coming 12 to 18 months? I also think that we really need to stop letting a calendar and monthly time limits and annual time limits affect our planning. Real life doesn't happen in convenient 30-day monthly segments, and I know that we need to report financials, and I know we need to report quarterly progress on our objectives and so forth, but I think it's okay to segment out your activities into implementation steps that take 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months, and don't limit yourself to that 12-month time period. I think oftentimes it ends up being more of a reporting problem to fit it into those time frames than it is an action problem in getting things done. Your strategic intent, again, is long-term and directional. Your board, your physicians, executives, in other words, should be involved. Again, these are your keys to success. Your operating plan has to have the specific measurable details, business plans. I didn't touch on those on the earlier diagram, but sometimes your business plans can be a foundational cornerstone to your strategic plan. If you have specific business initiatives, say, we're going to build an orthopedic center of excellence, and to do that we know we need to recruit 4 orthopedic surgeons, and we know we need to fit out our ORs with new technology and robotics and everything else you may want to do, and oh, by the way, we're going to align our physical rehab services with our physician clinics in an outpatient model that surrounds our community with easy access locations. That business plan can exist independent of a strategic plan, but you won't really need to make sure that it is in fact tied into your strategy. Sometimes these business plans make so much sense that you just launch into them before you've actually refined your strategic plans, and that's okay. Your annual budget, again, must tie to the annual operating plan and be consistent with your 5-year capital plan, and that needs to be updated all the time. Depending on your access to capital, your bond rating may change, especially in this day and age as systems are developed and you're getting into obligated groups and so forth. What you can afford as an entity may go up or may go down, depending on what kind of relationship you might be in a system, and that's going to affect your ability to have your annual operating and capital plans. And then again, your communication plan started from the beginning. If you start from the very first process of what are you going to tell people about this strategic plan development, you're going to be well situated to then communicate it once you're done. And then making sure you're thinking about how you're going to monitor your performance, provide your quarterly feedback on an ongoing basis once you're in place. So a quick example of a way to get input is if you had board members, physicians, staff members, and community folks all come together, you divide them into 4 groups, and you ask them questions. What's the future of care? What's the future of environment? What's the future of interaction and relationship within our healthcare system? And you ask them each to wear certain hats, and you fill out the information into these quadrants, and then from the point of view of who it is that they're representing, they offer their support, their view, concepts, and then also who it is that they most interact with and what they expect those people need to be successful. And I'd be happy to go into more detail on this later if you want to hear some more about some specific ways to do it. Key competencies, you need to know your assets. What do you need to be successful? What's your beginning point of strength, and how are you going to build from that or build to those assets you need to have? Your community awareness, participation, volunteers, your connectedness. What are you really known for? And be realistic and be specifically critical of yourself in this. Everyone focuses on excellence and quality, but what does it really mean? And what is your mission? And what are the key elements of success for you in those aspects? And then what does growth mean to you? Is growth revenue growth? Is it growth into new markets? Is it new relationships? Is it the speed to change and adjust to what's going on around you? What does growth really mean to you? It's not only about increasing your bottom line. Again, I think you need to be realistic about how that plays out. Here's a quick example you probably can't see very well, but on the left-hand side you have a mission box, a strategic vision, and then your core values. Those define across 6 different pillars strategic imperatives. Again, not specifically measurable imperatives, and then those goals and objectives as you roll right become more specific and more tactical. And the objectives on the right, it's very important to have those specifically tied into executive and management level responsibilities and accountabilities, their own job performance. And again, later in the Q&A, I'm happy to go into more details on this and what's behind it. These next few slides are just reminders of the definitions that I used. You can glance at these on your own. You can make up your own as you need to go, but it's very important at the beginning of your process, what is your process? What's the expected outcome? How are you going to communicate that outcome to others? What terminology are you going to use so that there's consistency within the organization and within the participants? And then how are you going to monitor your own success in the process of your strategic and operational plan development? And how are you going to make sure that translates successfully into your annual operating plan and annual operating budget? And so with that, I will hand over the presentation to Heather, who will give you some of her own examples. And again, I'm happy to offer any answers to questions you might have at the end of the presentation. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tim. What I'm going to do as the Chief Strategy and Mission Officer, an interesting title that really evolved from the strategic planning process. So my part of the presentation is really going to be real-life examples of key takeaways or lessons learned that I think would be valuable to anybody beginning to discuss their strategic plan, and things that I wish I would have known before we started down this process. But the bottom line, what we want to do is really set the best platform for executing the strategic plan, really a critical component of being successful in the process. High level, we took 90 days to come up with a 10-year strategic plan. And I know that sounds almost insane and wouldn't necessarily disagree. But what we thought is you normally can take a year and you can do that. But what we wanted to do, we were leaving a health system, becoming an independent organization on our own, and timing was of the essence. And we had a certain amount of time. We wanted to get it done. We wanted a lot of engagement, and we moved forward with a 90-day process. And let me tell you, there were 3 years out of our 10-year strategic plan, and the plan is still solid and living and breathing and being executed every day. High level, the points I wanted to highlight is the strategic plan is one component of executing your organization's future. What really starts before anything else, I think Tim referred to it, is that big vision. We have to begin with a big, bold vision, and that has to be set by your board of directors. It has to be understood and endorsed by your CEO and your senior leadership team. That's where it really all starts. So from that perspective, once you get a sense, and that takes some dialogue to come up with this big, bold vision, and then you set forth on the path, okay, to achieve that, where do we go from here? And it does take strategic planning. It takes certainly business planning. Tim spoke to the annual cycle. We follow that. Your facilities, critical in this planning process. The machine and mechanism of what's going to happen, and all of that equates into operationalizing what is a pretty comprehensive strategic plan. The planning process, if you'll see, if you take these categories, very inclusive, and it really impacts all disciplines. And you would be remiss to not include as many disciplines in the organization as you can to make sure that it's executed well. What we found is by including everybody, and it is a lot to manage, it's very cumbersome, but it does help eliminate disconnects, which you're going to have. It helps eliminate confusion. For us, it was a fairly confusing process, A, because it was so quick, but 2, a lot of people to communicate with. And then you have varying degrees of understanding and what the expectations are. So to keep this big machine rolling, it's just best to follow that process. I think the key takeaway for this particular slide is talk up well in advance the strategic planning process. Talk about what you want to do as an organization, why you're doing it, what the impetus is, how exciting the process is, and it really brings the organization along the strategic journey together. Physicians, I'll add, are critical to that. Not to oversimplify what is one strategic architecture. Tim mentioned that they followed a certain process. There are many ways to execute and deliver a strategic plan. This is really the architect or the framework that we used. It lays out clear steps along the planning process. And what I would recommend is that every meeting that you have, and there will be hundreds. For us, there was hundreds of meetings with various groups, and I'll talk you through how we approached that. But we always started out with, this is what we're on to deliver. This is how we're planning this process. And we always communicated where the organization was in this particular process. So what that helps us do is really what's most important, what are we on to deliver, and it keeps things on plan. So when we begin with, at least at the beginning of our process, we had more than 200 people engage in our strategic planning process. Got together initially at that first meeting and started talking about our challenges as an organization today, our challenges for what we believed at that time the future to be in healthcare. And there were probably 30 what netted out to be 30 fairly large strategic issues. Now the strategic plan, one caveat, cannot cover 30 strategic issues. So what we had to do, and should plan for this, is really robust dialogue, some disagreement, but inclusive dialogue about what are those most critical issues. We narrowed it down to five key strategic initiatives, and that's how we refer to it. You're going to have a whole nomenclature around your plan, but 5 key strategic issues that really deal fundamentally with physicians, the who, what, when, where, and how, like Tim said, one page, the who, what, when, where, and how, your plan, what it means, who's going to do it, where you're going to do it, with what services, how you're going to do it, what the financial performance needs to be, and then the how, the quality. What are those most important quality metrics and how you define that going forward? So as far as the key takeaways from this particular slide, I think it's really important to plan on and to chart out your process for talking about where you are in the plan. Plan for your new language. Key strategic issues was terminology we didn't use before we started the strategic planning process. And that word strategic, you're going to get so sick of hearing it, but because everything is strategic. But really, you're going to have a whole new language. We have to engage all of our team members up and down the organization in the dialogue. Meetings with the executives, meetings that they have, the strategic plan, the planning, the process, where we are in it, always was part of every agenda. Every time we had a meeting, the strategic plan or progress, what we called Vision 2020, was always a part of every single agenda, and it helps that communication process and execution plan throughout the organization. So even if it was just one line item on where we are, who we are, it was critical that the senior leadership team, the president, managers, always talked about where we were in that process, and that was very helpful to the time frame and to getting it done. This slide is difficult to read, I apologize, but what it really indicates is the multi-stakeholder process and how truly important that is. We need to identify ahead of time who are those individuals, teams, groups of people who are critical to the future success of the organization. And you'll find there's probably not an audience in this wheel that's not meant. Inclusivity helps with buy-in. It helps with plan adoption. So while your patient and family advisory council, as my example, might not be front and center in the strategic plan, they need to be engaged, and they should be engaged. But it really starts with the board. We found that physicians wanted, needed, had to have a seat at the table. So 200 people, I mentioned that, were in these respective categories. We had a series of meetings when we defined our 5 KSIs, our key strategic initiatives. We then executed a series of meetings to plan how we're going to execute over the next 10 years and deliver these big strategic initiatives based on that big, bold vision. I think the key takeaway from this particular slide is communication is critical. If you do not have the infrastructure or the appropriate players at the table, that has to be part of your strategic planning process. The communications is critical. How we manage and maintain the data and the strategy is really important. We didn't have a strategic division, and now we do, that supports the execution of the strategic plan. And then I'll also add, it takes a significant structure, not too many, but it does take attention to detail on how to manage the strategic planning process. So you think about setting up meetings for all of these stakeholders, ensuring that you are staying on task, ensuring you're meeting your deadlines, leading the communications of the teams, helping execute a similar process, which I'm getting ready to get to, in each of these teams. It does take some forethought, it does take some planning, and it does take really good preparedness to execute a strategic plan effectively. This is one of the areas that I'll tell you that we struggled with, the business planning and initiative development. Not that we don't know how to business plan, that's not it, but what we have to do is make sure that our plans for each of these strategic initiatives followed the same thought process, included the same types of data. And so what we formed was a supporting strategy team, and that was from players from each of the respective departments in the organization about how they would help us plan and execute the overall strategic vision. So like I said, we had 5 key strategic issues: the physicians, our quality, where we were going to do it, i.e. regional outreach and network development, what our clinical platform was going to look like, and then for us, a strategic issue was our campus master plan. And so we formulated 5 teams with 7 to 10 people, 7 to 15 people, leaders in these respective areas, serving on these teams, and then they might have grown depending on what the issue was. But really you had leaders at the table, a lot of engagement, really talking through, if this is the big vision, this is what we're working on, and you followed the plan to the left. So each initiative had its own vision. They each had to look at their trend analysis for what they were looking at. Each of the teams did a market analysis on that particular issue. They all did a SWOT analysis on their particular strategic issue they were working on. We had 5. Stakeholder input, very, very important. We needed to talk to physicians, 1,000 physicians across the system. How do we do that? How do we engage? Who does that? And then, what are we going to plan? Here's what we're thinking. What's it going to take for us to execute? And each of these teams came up with their own financial plan over the course of 10 years. And then we'll take that back, and I'll show you how we put that into execution. Tim's point about the annual operating plan, that's really important. That's how you get it done. And then financial analysis, performance metrics. So finance, as an example, served on every team. Strategy served on every team. Marketing on every team. And so it's really a cumbersome and comprehensive process, but to get that massive buy-in and the best product that is serving us very well still today, just be prepared for that level of engagement. For those who are Baldrige applicants or in that process, you're very familiar with how important the PDCA's Plan, Do, Check, Act. We take a little bit different spin on it as far as this is how we have the process to execute the strategic plan. And what this is just how we think about that. We initiate it, we plan it, we look at the execution, and then we close it, i.e. evaluate it. So what's I think really important for us in this particular thing, the process is the same regardless of where you are in each of the teams, but defining the owners of the strategies and the measurements is part of that initiate before you, as you do that, utmost important. And for us, a huge lesson. We have to define the clear owners. We have to ensure and align the metrics across the board to ensure we're going to meet the strategic vision. So what we did as we went through this process, we had our big strategic initiatives, and what we did was say, okay, of these initiatives, what are those factors that are most critical to achieving this vision? And we take those, what we now call critical success factors, and we align that across the organization, and we make it part of compensation. So we are bringing to life the execution of strategic plan. We have the plan, and on an annual basis, we set what are those critical success factors that are most important to achieving that big vision, to achieving that strategic plan, and we implement that into our compensation program on an annual basis. So the CEO, the executives, the directors, the managers, each have maybe 5 critical success factors that are built to support the strategic plan. You can, I'm sure, guess what they are. They're probably everybody's, but financial performance. There is a growth goal in there. There is a quality, actually all matrices on quality indicators. And there's an experience and satisfaction component, to name a few. But they are consistent across the organization. They are the same for everybody. And what they do is really support the execution of the strategic plan. One of the biggest lessons we learned in trying to execute, and it's not perfect to this day, but one of the biggest, I think, takeaways that would be really important is to be very clear. Clarity is critical. Who is on to lead it? Who is accountable? What goal are they accountable to? How is it measured? When is it measured? And what are the results? So we can come back and tweak the plan if we need to. If we find out a strategy is not working, what's then the process At what point do we discuss it? At what point do we change? And then we also learned that we are not very good at project management. So we really utilized an interesting team, our IT team, to help us lay out solid project management timelines. And that really helped the organization execute on its strategic plan. We had 3 phases in our planning process. Phase 3 was apply the treatment. Diagnose the problem. I mean, you can imagine what we called them. But phase 3 was applying the treatment. And I'll draw your attention to those 3 bullet points of this particular slide. Develop the metrics balanced scorecard for the strategic plan implementation. I think that's really important. We do that on an annual basis. We have a 10-year plan. We have a 10-year capital plan. And we have highlighted what big initiatives we want to execute when over the course through 2020. That being said, the metrics and the balanced scorecard are gauged on an annual basis, and that's how we make sure we are taking off the plan. And 2, as we change it. I'll get to that in a second. The structure for executing the strategic plan, that's an interesting experience that we went through as an organization. We were structured very traditionally, and what we realized is we probably don't have the right framework from a leadership perspective to execute the strategic plan. And Tim, your point about culture, I cannot reiterate how important culture is. We have to know our physician influencers. We have to know our influential leaders. We have to know who really can get things done, because we cannot move the plan throughout the organization unless we understand how the culture works. And we've learned a lot of lessons by that. We've assigned certain things to maybe to hold a certain executive accountable, but what really happens is influentially they're not helping, or they're not being influenced in that process. It's a totally different cultural process outside the strategic plan. So it's just important to know those, and you can react to those, but what we did is we restructured, knowing, as an example, we didn't have a strategic division. So how do we better manage the plan across the board? So it's just been an interesting journey, but paying attention to that structure, just having some dialogue ahead of time to prepare yourself is not a bad idea. And then clearly conduct periodic reviews. That's really important. We didn't do that so well before the strategic plan, but what it's allowed us to do is when we come back and look at the performance and how things change, we can change our strategic path. For example, we had network development as one of those big issues. Well, as time has gone on, we've executed on that very well, but what we've done is, based on the success of that regional outreach and network development, we have expanded that particular strategy to the tune of investing probably $50 million more over the course of the next 5 to 7 years, because that strategy was so successful, and it's growing even more so than we thought. So ability to tweak the plan is really the point, but culture really is the key takeaway from that particular slide. This is our perspective. When you look at the business cycle, all of us have traditional business cycles that we follow. Ours with the strategic plan is just a little bit different in that we start from the right. We think where we want to go, big strategies, and then we go right to left thinking. So what is it going to take for the next 3 to 5 years to deliver that 10-year plan? And then we really focus on those annual metrics, annual goals, and annual operating plan. And we just are pretty consistent in before the fiscal year ends. What do we need to do? How are we going to get it done? And set those critical success factors up for the next year. What really the annual plans do is serve as milestones along the 10-year strategic plan. That's how we consider it. And then what this is, as I wrap up with this next slide and can answer questions, I've kind of gone all over the board. But really, it's very important that we take a look at each of these teams has a good understanding of what's happening in the market. As an example, we think about the physicians in the medical practice. When we started the strategic process, they had a vision of restructuring the medical staff, simplifying it, and really making it more based on service lines, disease management, etc. All well and good. has been executed, but what has evolved out of that is what is now a clinically integrated network. And that strategy was not part of the 10-year plan, but as we look at it on an annual basis and 3 to 5 year increments, it's a new part of the strategic plan. So some things may change, some things may fall off, some things may be added, but that's the beauty of really having a very robust plan and one that's executable. I think that competition, that's been an interesting thing in this market. Very large systems where the area is only independent. And then that discussion, mergers, non-mergers, systems, non-systems. And that wasn't a part, all the activity, is fairly recent. So it wasn't a huge part of our strategic discussion 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but it is today. And so now we're infusing these different strategic issues as we go about the planning process. Every year we come up and we have kind of a refresher of where are we, what are these new strategic issues we need to discuss. And then, interesting payment as it evolves. Patient-centered medical homes are new. Medicaid expansion is going to be new. Narrow networks are emerging in our market. So what we'll plan on doing as it relates to the long-term strategic plan is infuse these fairly sizable issues on an annual basis, bring key groups together, talk about it, see if we need to tweak the plan, 3 to 5 year outcome, 1 year operating plan, or if it's going to impact our long-term 10-year plan, infuse that as we go along. But ultimately, the big vision hasn't changed. The framework for the plan hasn't changed. Specific tactics have on an annual basis and as appropriate, but ultimately, it's important to build a plan, to know that you're going to adjust it. It's a living, breathing document. And then always, I think, a huge lesson for us, always review the implications to your physicians and to the biggest economic engine, which for our system is the hospital. So we always have to take a look at and step back and say, what are these big implications and what are the impacts from that perspective? So in a nutshell, high level, there are many, many lessons learned. I could go on for days about that, and we'll be happy to answer any questions, but fundamentally, key takeaways I thought that would be very helpful. As I turn it over to Ken, we'll look forward to taking your questions at the end. So Ken, you ready?
Yeah, thanks Heather and Tim. I kind of feel unfortunate here. I think Tim and Heather have done a great job in giving y'all information on strategic planning, and I know we want to get the questions. So I'm going to try to hit some high points and not try to repeat a lot of what they've shared, which is very, very valuable information. My background is I've been doing strategic planning now for over 20 years. I've done it in the direct care system. I've done it at vendor or healthcare software companies. And a lot of the principles across all those groups are the same. Now I'm with a big, large defense contractor, and we have a very strenuous strategic planning process where the business unit I'm in, which covers military health and veterans affairs, feeds up to a larger health sector strategic plan, then feeds up to our division, then it goes up to our company, General Dynamics Information Technology, and then that rolls up to our big General Dynamics corporation. So we go through it every year. It's a formal process. I'd like to say that it's clean every year, but as I came into this role 3 years ago, because it's such a formal process, I did see a lot of my predecessors using it as a check mark. It's done, putting it on the shelf. So one of the things I've tried to do over the last 3 years is make the strategic planning process a living process, not an annual process, and making sure that whatever we're executing and doing is according to whatever we outlined in our strategic plan, and then modifying that strategic plan if we found out that we were off the mark in a certain area. But a lot of times I see groups do this, put it on the shelf, and then pop-ups, pet projects, and things like that tend to overtake what you were trying to do in your strategic plan. So, like I said, I'm just going to highlight a few things through here that I think are critical. One, you need to establish your priorities. Your strategic plan should establish the priorities for your organization, no matter what your organization does, no matter what your vision is, no matter what your mission is. It should set the priorities, and then it should set the things that you're going to do over the course of that strategic plan, whether it's a 1-year, 3-year, or a 5-year. It should also help you make some hard choices, because through this process you ought to find out what you're good at doing, what you're not so good at doing, or what are some of the things you need to target as far as growth areas. And so it should help you make the choices about what you should do, what you will do, and what you will not do, because it's the things you should not be doing that sometimes take you down a rabbit hole and do not allow you to attain the goals and objectives that you've set in your strategic planning process. It's got to involve the entire organization, and I think Heather and Tim have done a great job in outlining all those aspects. But if you don't have all the right players at the table, if you don't have buy-in across the organization, especially those parts of the organization that are going to have to execute the tactics that are in the strategic plan, then your strategic plan will fail before it ever gets started. So you really, really have to make sure that everybody buys in to what you put in the strategic plan, what the goals and objectives are, and what are some of the tactics that you've outlined that you're going to go execute to reach those goals and objectives. And then your strategic plan ought to be used to basically guide where resources are allocated. Again, I go back to that pop-ups or pet projects, or somebody wants to, found out about something nice, some shiny object or some new process or new whatever. If that doesn't fit into your strategic plan, or it's not of such significance that you should modify your strategic plan, then resources really shouldn't get allocated to those kinds of things. So it really should guide your resource allocation. I guess on this one, the only thing I want to highlight, there's been a whole lot of things said about this by Heather and Tim, but you've got to communicate to everyone. Again, I've been in a lot of organizations. I've seen strategic plans done. I've seen them completed, checked off, and then put up on the shelf, and never communicated to the lowest levels. Once the strategic plan is done, once you've gone through the process and got all the buy-off and buy-in, and this is what you're going to do, the most important aspect of that is communicating that all the way down to the lowest level of your organization, so they understand what your strategic objectives are and what you're trying to accomplish, and get their buy-in. And more importantly, it also allows them, when they see things happen in your organization, if they know what the strategic plan is, it kind of allows them to connect the dots and say, oh, we're doing this, that's why we're doing it. And in some cases, it will die down with some of the problems you get in change management and with people critiquing processes. So communication is key. It can't be something that's just kept to the executive leadership or to the people involved in developing the strategic plan. These are some of the benefits from strategic planning. Again, it should establish, realistic goals, objectives, and strategies for what you're going to do. Tim kind of brought that up. You've got to make sure, and so did Heather when she was talking about how many key strategic initiatives. You can have too many. They really got to be realistic. They need to be measurable. You've got to be able to look on a periodic basis, whether that's monthly, quarterly, biannually, and measure your progress. Again, that's there to make sure that if you're not accomplishing what you set out, why are you not accomplishing it? And do you need to make any midterm adjustments to what you set as your goals and objectives? Is it the tactics are wrong, or it's the wrong objective? So you need to be measuring it and looking at it. And I agree with Tim, you don't measure the strategy. You're actually measuring the tactics that you've outlaid to reach that strategy. And you've got to make sure that in the strategic planning process, that ultimately what comes out of that is you get a consensus of the leadership and even the mid-level leadership on what is the direction you're trying to take your organization. Whether it's, building off of what you do real well, or if it's going in a new direction, adding a new product line, adding a something new to your portfolio. Whatever that is, you've got to make sure that it ultimately leads to, consensus, or else your strategic plan will never be successful. A good strategic plan, it should have balance. And what I mean by that is sometimes in this process, you can focus more on growth, new product lines, new things, changes in the healthcare industry, and you forget about what you're doing very well. And there are some things you can do around organic growth to expand what you're already doing and making it better or pushing it out to a larger market. So it needs to be balanced. The growth should be balanced. It should be somewhat visionary. Again, it should be taking you to what your desired end state is based upon whatever the strategic planning period is. And then it should guide decision making. I've done this a lot with my business development team. They'll come in and want to go chase a new technology or introduce something to our client base, and always look and say, does that fit into our strategic plan? Is that part of what we outlined that we want to do? If not, then we either need to talk about changing the strategic plan, or we need to make sure that our efforts are focused on the strategic direction we're trying to go. So it really does need to guide decision making. And if it's used and it's followed, it's updated on a regular basis, it will do that for you. This is real quick, just showing kind of, from the top, your mission, your vision, your goals. Then you develop your objectives, however many those are, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, you don't want them to be too many because they do have to be achievable. Then what are the initiatives under those objectives? What are the tactics? What are the things you're going to do to make sure you reach that objective? You need to make sure that those initiatives or tactics are measurable. How are you going to measure them? When are you going to measure them? Who is going to measure them? And then what is your targets? So it's kind of, a process that you follow to basically get down to, the tactical level of what do you need to do to execute. The next few slides I'm going to do real quick because, again, they've kind of covered it. But the most important thing when you're working on a strategic plan is first, I've come from more of the product vendor industry side. And so we've always, most importantly, had to do an environmental scan, market research, identify who our competition is, identify, where the market is going, what are some of the new things coming up. And so you have to start with that premise of doing that environmental scan, which also applies to, direct healthcare delivery systems as well. And then you have to do a SWOT. This is the one exercise that I have always found in strategic planning that is the most beneficial, because if you know your strengths, your weaknesses, the opportunities that exist for your organization, and the threats to your organization for success, that should help guide you towards some of the things that you need to be doing. And that can all be displayed. In General Dynamics, we have a SWOT that's basically a quad chart. That one slide tells us pretty quickly what we need to change, what we need to work on, and what direction we need to go. So I found the SWOT to be, one of the most beneficial exercises you can go through when you're doing a strategic planning process. Again, we talked about the goals and the strategies and objectives. I'm not going to reiterate that because Heather and Tim did a great job. Again, I think the biggest point, and it was brought up by Heather and Tim in theirs, and that is funding. To give you an example, if in your strategic plan you're going to go in a new market area or a new focus, and to do that you have to have a strategic hire of a certain subject matter expert. And that strategic hire is critical to being able to go into that direction. Well, if it's not, that position's not funded, it's not put in the budget, it's not there, and you can never hire that person, well, then your plan's going to go nowhere. So the strategic plan being put into the funding cycle tied to it, so that the budget that is developed supports that strategic plan, to me is the most critical. and is the most critical to success. I've seen many times the strategic plan be developed and not be appropriately funded, and it's pretty much dead on arrival. Again, like I said before, communicating the plan is important, and not only to the stakeholders, but also, throughout your organization. You've got to monitor and evaluate it, and there is a continuous improvement process to this. What I mean by that is you can't stick to your strategic plan so tightly that if you find out, a year down the road, 6 months down the road, that something has changed in the marketplace, in your customers, that you need to tweak your strategic plan, then you need to kind of, own up to that and do that, and not continue down a course that maybe, has changed. So you do need to continuously improve. The strategic plan should be a living document, not something that's done and then just like put up on a shelf. This last slide, this just really shows you how we've done this in the General Dynamics system, of how we go through kind of our process, and some time frames about when we do our budgeting and when we do our strategic planning, and how that ties to our strategic planning process, just to, kind of bring it together. And then lastly, my final thoughts are, you got to integrate all components of the strategic planning process. They can't be done in a vacuum. They've all got to be tightly together. You need to get early wins. In other words, if you have a strategic plan, you need to find that one objective that might be the easiest to obtain, and getting an early win in a strategic plan will get the momentum started and allow the more difficult objectives, I think, to be attained quicker, and also facilitates buy-in. Also, seek external expertise. I think sometimes we think that we can do it all, we know it all, and sometimes having an outside source coming in to kind of help, can benefit a strategic planning process. And then just make sure, and I think it was either Tim or Heather to mention this, but you got to articulate your requirements to senior leadership. There's got to be a buy-in at the senior leadership level around what the strategic plan is trying to do, and then getting the funding and the things, support that you need at the high levels to be able to execute. Because without that, execution will be real difficult. So that's all I've got. I'll turn it back over to the organizers and see if there are any questions.
All right. Thanks to our presenters today, Tim, Heather, and Ken. I guess at this time we'd like to go ahead and open up the presentation to any additional questions that you may have for today's speakers. As a reminder, you can use the chat box to the left, which would probably be the preference. Also, you can press *6 to unmute your lines and join the conversation. I guess, Tim, we'll go back and start with you. Marcus's question, what is an example, or actually, this may be actually more to Ken, what is an example of a quick kill?
Well, for me, right now I work for a defense contractor, and it could be that you have a customer looking for a particular new capability, and being able to identify that capability, bring it to the customer, and then through that, getting the contract expanded and getting some increased line funding would be able to show that. Heather and Tim may have some other thoughts from a healthcare delivery aspect of what are some things that you might be able to do quick. But for us, it's if I can find something that's going to drive some initial revenue that can be tied to the strategic plan, to me that increases the buy-in from my senior leadership.
Tim or Heather, do you have anything to add?
I think that
go ahead, Heather.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that that's a very good point. It is important to show how you are executing the plan. A quick win for us. We don't use kill. It's a hospital, but a quick win for us was, we had maybe 5 or 6 ambulatory outpatient locations out in the community that we wanted to execute in the next 10 years. We got the first one up showing that we were serious about the plan, we got the first one up in less than a year. And so it just says, hey, and you always reiterate in your communications, we're executing on the strategic plan, this is what it is, this is where it's going, et cetera. So it's really important to make sure that the document lives.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add is that I've seen in a few different organizations, effectively a holding pen for good results-focused initiatives. One was called Results Management Initiatives that some folks at Mercy Hospital in Portland, Maine started. I was part of that, and I've seen variations on that theme where you have a set of specific initiatives that have a targeted purpose directly linked to your strategic plan with specific investments required and expected returns. And these can be simple short-term things, and they can be longer-term and more complicated things. For instance, something as simple as changing the doorknobs on the stairwell doors so that our staff would use the stairwell more often to decrease the use of our elevators so that we didn't have to add an elevator to our facility. Simple, kind of silly example, but it was brought up by a staff member when we said we've got to get people using the stairs more and so forth. And, there was a cost to doing so, and then there was a communication and the initiative to get the staff to do it. But you can map that out and say it makes a difference, and it's something we want to pursue. And you can have more specific ones like we need to acquire a group of 4 primary care physicians in our region, and it's going to take a lot of investment to recruit and attract those ones. And so you tee that up as a specific initiative business plan that you can, in a sense, when you have the resources and or the imperative, you pull it off the shelf, you implement it, and then you jump to the next one.
Perfect. Why don't we go on to Caitlin's question next? Again, we'll just stay in the same rotation here. How and should a performance management program be tied to the strategic plan?
Well, I'll start. At least for my organization, for me, all the way to the top to the president of our company, the goals in our strategic plan are tied to bonus on our annual bonuses. So we are evaluated every year on how well we were able to meet the objectives of the strategic plan. One, we're evaluated on did we get a strategic plan developed, and then were we able to execute that, and how well do we execute that? And for us, 9 times out of 10, it is tied to revenue. Did the strategic plan drive revenue? But we are evaluated. I think it's something like 20-25% of my evaluation on my bonus on an annual basis is tied to our strategic planning process.
Ours is the exact same way. Our executive compensation as far as the incentive plan, which is a significant portion of my salary, is based on delivering the goals of the strategic plan. As an example, for this year, one of those, 20% of my bonus compensation is do we hit our growth metric. The growth metric we have planned out over the next 10 years, how many inpatient and outpatient patients we need to grow to achieve a financial outcome, to achieve a strategic plan. And if we do not hit that annual growth goal, I do not get that portion of the compensation. So it works. It's incentivizing.
I would agree with what they said. That piece I'd add is that you can then cascade those goals down to directors and managers as well. I've implemented systems in a few different places where, like Heather, as an executive, I had specific goals that tied to the strategic plan, and I would then roll those out to my directors and managers, so that I might have 6 key goals that tied into some element of incentive compensation for me. Our directors had similar incentive compensation, and each one of them might have 2 goals that are directly and exactly the same as mine, plus one that might be unique that crosses over to, say, a different vice president. And then, that way, not only are we aligned to the strategic plan, but we're aligned to each other. And you can also use that to create some of the cross-departmental collaboration you need, say a director of nursing with a director of imaging. You work together to make sure those 2 individuals have one of their incentive compensation goals be exactly the same. whether that be throughput in the OR related to surgical imaging activities or whatever it might be. If those two individuals have the exact same goal, and particularly if that's been a barrier to some quality or success metric organizationally, you can really get people to move forward.
All right, great input. I guess we'll move on to Anne-Marie's question. For what organizations or methodology did any of you determine your process?
Well, we kind of have our own internal process. When I joined Journal Dynamics, it was already there. We have an enterprise system in place, and there are, from what having done this for 20 years, there are all kinds of business development processes out there, groups, and you can pull from. I think the most important is none of those are going to work perfect for every organization. So I think you need to take a model, you need to look at it, and then tailor it to fit your very specific organization. Trying to take something off the shelf and do it, I think, would be problematic. So at least in Journal Dynamics, we have our own internal process that we've developed. It's documented, it's on paper, and we follow it pretty religiously.
We hired an external consultant specializing in healthcare. We are a kick the tires kind of organization. We want to know that it's had success elsewhere, and so we weren't prepared, nor did we have the internal expertise to begin what was a strategic planning process as a newly independent hospital. So we hired Cambridge Research Institute out of the Boston area. Our rep is no longer there, but they had a planning process, and as we just said, really adapted it to what would work for our organization, but we did use someone else's methodology, but now have adopted it pretty good.
The process that I use has been developed over my 18 years. I was a consultant for a long time, and had the basic core process, and you can see through Ken and Heather and my slides, the core elements of the process are pretty much the same. Again, there's that importance of adapting it to the specific culture and individuals in a process, and also the time cycle. Do people want this thing done in 3 months, or do they want to be a little bit more cathartic and participative because that's one of their goals, is just to create that connection. So you need to adapt over time. But what was interesting in my experience is having done it as a consultant for about 8 or 9 years, and then doing it from the inside, if you will, as a vice president of planning in 2 different hospitals and health systems, you learn a lot about what really works and what doesn't. And I think an outside facilitator is very, very important. Again, though, as Heather said, making sure it's adaptive and relates to the specific environment you're looking at.
Okay, moving on, it looks like we have a question on any possibility of contacting any of the 3 of you for further information or communication. There's a possibility that maybe we can work something out through the registration list for those of you who are willing, possibly to get out any contact information via email.
But Heather and I both, I think on the communication chat thing there, we put our contact information out there. You're free to copy that down.
Yeah, and you're also free to share mine if anybody wants to contact me.
Perfect. Moving on to Summer's question then, what advice do you have for those of us working with multiple hospital regional plans? What modifications would you make to the overarching regional plan and to each of the hospital's individual strategic plans?
Well, being the hospital provider, if you will, on the call, I'll throw out my thoughts. The 2 gentlemen have far more experience in strategic planning, probably multiple sites, but it's a difficult question that you're answering. Ultimately, the big vision of the organization has to come from the very top, and then what's critical and crafty with your strategic planning division and or your communication division and your CEO is how to make sure we translate what the big vision is and the individual hospital's part to play in that overarching vision. Now, previously, as part of a system, we had a big vision, and guess what? The individual hospitals didn't buy into that, and it absolutely stalled and came to a very, very bad ending. So it's really, really important to handle that as sensitively, thoughtfully as you can, but you do need that great big system vision, for lack of a better term, and then making sure that each of your respective hospitals understand their critical and important role to play in executing what is this big vision for the community. And then, the resources to execute the strategic plan at multiple sites, that's very difficult, but can be done, but just really a thoughtful approach and make sure that they all feel integrated in that process would be just some of my beginning advice.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Heather said. I've had experience as a standalone hospital, and then being part of a large system. There's a lot of systems that do a lot of top-down planning. Here are the 5 core strategic imperatives we have as a system, and now you, participant hospitals, will go forth and define how you're going to make our system successful, and that's a challenge. I think if the system has some participative vision, there's a way to have some directional intent at the system level, and then endorse and support the participant hospitals to figure out the right interpretation of those for their specific market. I've also been part of some system strategic planning efforts where you go around to the individual hospitals, and if you use a Quint Studer approach and you have your 5 key pillars of success, service, people, finance, quality, and growth, you ask each of the participant hospitals to come up with their initiatives, and then you aggregate those and find out where the similarities are, and then that's where some system resources can come to bear on supporting multiple hospitals across the system on those elements. I would say that that's a more mature system where you have success already in working collaboratively. It also depends on the geography you're talking about with your system and so forth. As Heather said, it's a very difficult question. Your best bet is to have cross-system, if you will, participation in developing that system vision so that you get better buy-in and more specifics for the local rollout.
I think that one thing I'll add is I think the biggest challenge in that kind of a multi-site environment that I've experienced is being careful not to create what I would call the haves, have-nots. If somebody doesn't feel their participation is contributing to that overall strategic plan and funding's going to a different area, that becomes a challenge. So biggest way is to make sure that the overall plan is developed by participation of all those, at the other sites, understanding that not everybody is going to get a major role in whatever the strategic direction is, but everybody is important because even if they're trying to maintain what they're doing, that's still critical to the success of the system. So it's, just not creating that have and have not environment, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Okay, great. I hope you can all see there then that we have Heather and Tim's information there. We'll move on to what extent do you communicate the strategic plan to the rank and file employees, and how do you do this?
I'll jump in on this. You have to do it. So to the extent that you do it as often and deeply as possible. There are communication and marketing theories that say you need to say the same thing 7 different times in 3 different media in order to get someone's attention and have them truly understand what you're talking about. So you begin with the communication of your strategic plan while you're developing it. You let the organization know what you're doing, why you're doing it, the process you're going to go through, and who's involved. And you ought to try to create some forum so that staff can at least raise questions or offer input or thoughts on what you're going to be developing. And then you need, again, a simple overview, this plan on a page or a single document, especially in today's world of electronic media. You can make it easily available to the staff. And then you also need a rollout process where, as it's presented to medical staff and directors and managers, you hand out specific talking points so that when they have their staff meetings, there's a consistency in what's said, how it's said, why it matters, and you anticipate the kind of questions you're going to get. How does this affect me? What do I need to do differently? And I used to always go through an orientation with new employees, and at the end of the day, I'd say, look, you should know what the strategic imperatives are, how those relate to what's going on an annual basis, and how your job specifically relates to that. And if you don't know the key reasons of what you're doing on a daily basis and how that relates to a strategic goal, ask somebody. And if no one can answer you, I'd tell them to come to me. Because if you can't figure out why an activity or function benefits the strategic goals and activities of the organization, you probably should stop doing it. And you kind of lay that out for the directors and managers so that they understand that their personal goals, their personal responsibilities, and those of their staff should directly relate to strategic goals. And you give them that conduit for the communication. I think it's essential.
What we did to help, it's classic sales, if you will. We have to sell it to the organization and make sure that they understand it. So there were a lot of fun things that we did, bringing in a little bit more marketing spin, if you want to use that term. We gave it a cool name and a cool graphic and its own color identity, and then we always referred to it as Vision 2020. It's mentioned in almost every single newsletter as specific examples of how we communicate to the rank and file. We talk about it in newsletters. We bring it up at every single management meeting that we have. And then in addition, it's funny you mentioned new employee orientation. The strategic plan is part of our new employee onboarding. So they know, they have comfort in, we're going to be here for the long haul. We have laid out where we're going for the next 10 years, and here's your role to play in that. So it's a really interesting and new part of how we even onboard employees.
All right, great. What is current trending of the, quote, new emerging thought or changing components around strategic planning today?
Real quick, the things I'm seeing, there's a couple what I'll call catchy terms, and I don't mean that derogatory at all. There's scenario-based planning and there's question-based planning. I think it's just derivations off of what strategic planning has always been before. I think there's a much accelerated process. People want things to happen much more quickly. And the length of time of a strategic plan has gotten shorter. I was interested to hear Heather's length of plan. I think there's great value in a long, 10-year type plan, but more and more people don't have the patience for that. So I think if we could move back in that direction, I'd love to see that trend emerge a little bit. But, a quick answer, I think it's a matter of people want to get through the process quickly. They want to be nimble and adaptive in what they're learning and set a plan that can then be reviewed, amended, and tweaked on a regular and timely basis.
I'll just add, I don't know, I hope it's not a trend or a new and emerging thought, but we have a tendency, just as a caveat, we have a tendency to want to react and call that strategic. And so I think it's very important for us to have that long-term vision. And, it's always, well, how do we react to that? How do we strategically adjust? And you really don't, the big vision and the long-term plan, the tactics may adjust and how you react might adjust, but really the plan doesn't. And so I just caution we're now getting a little, I don't know what the term is, but trigger happy to how to change the plan or adjust it based on what is probably short-term trends. So just be mindful as to not try and do that as best you can.
Yeah, just reiterate that. Considering my customers, the federal government, right now the federal government's going through a hard time, and what's happening on Capitol Hill is getting some of our executives trigger happy, and I think you've got to be careful. You need to evaluate what's happening, look at it, always stay on top, but be careful not to be reactionary unless you really have evaluated that a change is required. And I agree, it's usually a change to tactics, not the overall strategy. You shouldn't overhaul the overall strategy unless you've given it enough time to realize that whatever the objective is, it's not achievable.
I guess if I can add one more quick thought too, the idea of what market we're in is in great flux right now, and I think one of the great failures, failures that hospitals have made is they believe they're in the hospital business. And example I've always used is the railroad industry in this country, and the railways maybe aren't as strong here as they are elsewhere, and there's lots of reasons for that, but one of the reasons for it is as they were developing and as we were developing our transportation systems in this country, railroads thought they were the best railroads there ever could be. And they didn't consider themselves in competition with highways, trucks, airports, and airplanes. And they were very good at railroads, but they were not very good at global transportation. And I think that to better define the industry that we're really in is a very important piece of strategic planning. So, getting outside of who we are and who we always thought we were, getting to what are we really trying to accomplish here. The concept of hospital. When I do strategic planning, I try to never use the word hospital. I'll use health system, I'll use overnight care, I'll use total care processes and systems. But as you all know, it's moving to ambulatory, and now it's moving to insurance products, and you're getting into employer-based actual healthcare services, not just insurance. And so what is the market we're really in, and what are the strategic questions that need to guide us, need to change as the paradigm and the environment changes around us?
Okay, I know we're running short on time. We're going to try to wrap up here in the next 2 minutes or so. I know there's just one last question here trying to get at if one of you wouldn't mind trying to wrap that up in like 30 seconds to 1 minute, because I think it is a very valid question, is during a merger, how do you transition from each organization's separate plans to one cohesive plan and still get the buy-in of each individual site?
Well, having just gone through that, because we bought a company about 1.5 years ago, and they brought significant new capability particularly to my business unit, and it led to a reorg to combine all our healthcare into one sector. I think the biggest challenge is finding out what their capabilities are, look and see what their strategic plan was, compare that to what your strategic plan was of the group that you're merging, and then try to find those things that are similar, and then find those things that are different, and with the combined capabilities, what needs to drop, what needs to be added. So we actually went through it took about 6 to 9 months to find out what they had, find out what they brought to the table, how that matched with current capabilities, and how each strategic plan, kind of overlaid, and then decided what we wanted to do going forward as a combined group and what we wanted to drop off. And we did make changes. I mean, it vastly changed our strategic direction for our unit because of the new capabilities that we brought in. So it's difficult. It was a very painful process because things that I had developed, I had to actually let go of. But it's essential when you merge is to see where the overlay is and where the chaff is, and decide what you're going to drop and what you're going to carry forward.
All right, thank you very much, and I think we want to try to wrap up. So please know that if you are interested in learning more about this topic, the American College of Healthcare Executives has identified this next list here of additional resources, or you can obtain other resources by just going online to ache.org. With that said, I'd like to thank the speakers. I'd also like to thank you for joining the ACHE today for our webinar on strategic plans for successful operations. Once again, just a reminder that you'll be directed on your screen to complete a survey, and please, we would like to ask that you would take the time to do so. We hope you will join us again for future educational opportunities, and thanks again to all of you, and this concludes our webinar for today.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.